You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marble. I am so happy to welcome Dirk Uphoff today. He reached out to me through our website, and he has a very compelling story. He has a huge heart for other adopted people. He's only been out of the fog a year and a half. He's a little bit ahead of me. And I think it's a really great perspective to hear from those of us that are going through the real raw part of this. I would like to read you a bio on Dirk before we dive into his story. He lives in Phoenix. He was adopted at 3 weeks old in 1960 during the baby scoop era. He is a transracial adoptee, and his parents were both white. His racial identity is oddly enough a loaded question, because his racial identity was essentially a question mark for the first 50 years of his life. He grew up in a small town in central Illinois where he was the only person of color. He has an older non-bio brother who is also adopted and two younger sisters who are his parents' natural-born children. He came out of the fog, as I mentioned, a year and a half ago, and he is married with 4 grown kids. So welcome, Dirk. Thanks for being here with me.
Good to be here, Heidi.
Oh my gosh. So when I read your submission, first of all, whoa, that you spent that long and had no idea your racial identity. And then one thing that really stood out that I want to say up front before we dive in, this is what you said. When I was born, either my birth mom lied or the adoption agency lied or both. In 1960, I was a hot potato that needed to be moved off the baby shelf as quickly as possible. Wow, Dirk. Well, wherever you want to start.
Well, I guess I'll start back in 1960. My birth mother was in a home for unwed mothers, the Florence Crittenton home, which was one of the bigger homes, I think, back then. And then when I was 3 weeks old, I was adopted. But just to back up a little bit, my parents, who didn't think they could have kids, had adopted my older brother, who would become my older brother. And when he was about 4, they wanted to adopt a girl. And they just figured they'd run out their family that way. And they went to Florence Crittenton and asked for a girl. And basically they said, we have no girls available, but we've got this Hispanic boy that we think would be a great match for your other son that you'd adopted. And so I was basically adopted on the premise that I was Hispanic. So then 5 years later, my mom got pregnant, which was a huge surprise, and then pregnant again. So I've got 2 younger sisters that are my parents' natural kids, and then me and my older brother, who obviously adopted. But the town we grew up in was all white. My church, my school, my whole context was white. So I had no racial mirrors at all growing up. And I always think about the story when I was really young. I had to be probably 4 just because of kind of what's in the story. It was a summer, and it was probably the first summer that I got really dark skin. And I was walking by our car, and that was back in the old days, when all the bumpers were those heavy chrome things, and I could see my reflection off the car bumper, and I just stopped. And I was like, what's this? And then I'm making arm movements, and I'm like, that's me. How can that be me? And it just kind of freaked me out. And so I remember I went in and told my mom. I said, why am I so dark? And I forgot what she said, but she explained something very nicely. And I was, will it ever go away? Kind of questions. And it was just, I look back now and it's like, what does a 4-year-old do with that? So that was what was really tough. Just absolutely no people that looked like me, to the point where you don't think you look like that, anything different either. So yeah, like I was telling you before, the racial identity question's always been really a loaded question for me. Very kind of looking ambiguous my whole life and being asked all the time, what's your nationality? And people try to do it subtly and nicely, and people are always nice about it, but you just, after so many years, you just get kind of tired of that. But basically then, like for the first 50 plus years, it was kind of a who am I kind of thing. And then in 2014, I did Ancestry DNA and found out that I was half black and half white. I didn't have one drop of Hispanic blood. And so that was, I had suspected that because of the way I looked. And different people thought different things when they saw me. But my parents sure didn't think that. And my dad had passed away by the time I'd found this out. But my mom was still alive. And I mean, it was very difficult. I didn't want to tell her, and I didn't for a while. I just was like, how do I, talk to her about this? But by now it's 2014, I'm 54. I've been married for, 20, almost 30 years. I've got 4 grown kids, but it's just so hard to process. Somebody lied. I don't know. Like I said, it was either the adoption agency or my birth mom or both. But in 1960, there was no way, that I was going to get adopted if they would have told the truth. I'm sure I would have good chance that I would have fostered out. So, I mean, I'm glad that happened, but just having your life be in someone else's hands when you have no control, it's just difficult to stomach and to process.
Thank you for sharing that, Dirk. There's so many things about that stand out. I just kind of felt my knees buckle thinking about you as a 4-year-old, kind of shocked at the way that you were different. And it just shows, I don't know if desperation is the right word, but how adopted people just are continually forced to adapt. And I was just speaking to another adopted person earlier, and she brought up something I think would be really great interjected here. She said so many times adopted people grieve these things alone. So there you are as a child, and it's sad to not feel that you fit in and to be so physically different. A lot of us, like myself, we can blend a little bit.
Right.
And it takes away some of that pain, but to be continually asked and reminded. I'm just very sorry that you had to go through that. So, Dirk, at that moment when you got your DNA results and you're faced with this huge piece of your truth, you said that was 2014, but then you said you've only come out of the fog a year and a half ago, so there's a huge time gap. So I'm curious, what's the difference between those two segments of time? Because that one had to be a doozy in 2014.
Yeah, it was. It was a doozy. It was a lot of conversations that I never thought I was going to be having. First telling my wife, who's Hispanic, imposter here. And then telling your kids. And with the kids, it was so much easier because it was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And it was easier for my wife. But again, for me, it was a lot of baggage, so much baggage over the years. And the person that you were talking to, at that point, I literally thought I was the only one like me ever. I was a one-off. And so it didn't even enter my head there might be somebody that I could talk to about it. And so you just have to live there. And it's, and my parents were great, and all of us adoptees typically will say that. But I did. I had a great family. They loved me. I felt loved. I didn't feel, othered, so to speak, by them. But in 1960, they didn't teach parents anything about it. And they had no idea, how to raise me. And, just all the awkwardness and learning how to navigate life in dark skin when nobody else has that. And you don't look like any of your friends. And, I wanted to have the light hair that, kind of blew in the wind, and that wasn't going to happen. And, you just have no one that's like you. And it is pretty, it's a solitary place, even though I had a lot of friends. And, socially, my life was fine, but it's just that inside place that, no one else can get in there. And you don't want to let anybody else in there. So it's kind of a weird, solitary life. Even my brother, who was adopted, and he didn't really look very Hispanic, so he could blend into my family okay. And I had cousins also that were adopted, but all same race adoption. But my parents didn't talk about it. Their parents didn't talk about it. We never talked about it in my family. Adoption it's not like we couldn't, it's just that we didn't. And I think like with my brother, it was like, well, I never want to look. Okay, well, then I never want to look for birth family. It becomes kind of a competition that, that you want to please your parents. And it's a weird way to grow up, but you don't know it at the time. You just figure, hey, this is it.
Yeah, it's that adaptability that we have to survive. So when you officially came to terms with what adoption meant for your life in all of its layers a year and a half ago, was there a moment when that occurred? Did something trigger that? Or what defines that for you?
Well, like I said, I found all this out in 2014. But then it was immediately after that, it was just really, I wanted to find my birth family. Like I knew, finally who I was racially, but I wanted to find a birth mom, birth dad, get more of the story. So the next few years was really, investigation and trying to find them through ancestry. So I was focused more on the racial side of it than I was probably the adoption side at that point. And then when I did find my birth mother, and I won't go through that whole long story, but when I did find her, she didn't want to, have any relationship, at all. We had one short phone call that lasted about a minute. And when I said who I was, she just said, it was a tough decision I made back then. And, but I would appreciate it if you didn't reach out to me again. And then she hung up. And, so that part was really tough. But a very different experience with my birth dad side, who I didn't think about growing up. And now I hear that from other adoptees. I don't know why.
I don't know why either. We don't think we have fathers.
Yeah, we don't think. Funny. Yeah, we're like, oh, well, yeah, maybe. But So I never really thought about him. And even at one point where I was working with a court intermediary, after my mom had basically rejected me, they were like, well, do you want to look for your birth dad? And I was like, no, I'm good. I'm going to move on. And then through Ancestry, though, this was getting more 2016, 2017. I started getting all these hits all of a sudden. It was all the same family. And finally, a cousin was like, connected with me over Ancestry, and she was like a bulldog. She said, "We're going to find who your dad is," and she's able to do it. And found out that I had, my birth dad who was married, still married, and had 5 kids of his own. And I'm in a relationship with 4 of them. And that part's been really great. So
that's amazing, Dirk.
Yeah. So that's the good side that was just really neat. But even all that comes with difficulties, just being in the middle, so to speak. You're not really white, even though culturally that's what I've been all my life. And you're not really black because you weren't raised that way. It's a weird in between position that it's uncomfortable, and I feel bad. It's that shame word that comes along with adoption. It just raises its head in all these different scenarios, I think, and that's one for me. Because you want to, we are experts at fitting in. I can fit in anywhere. I can size a room up, and know how to act and be the chameleon and get right in there. But that's just such a learned skill that adoptees have, I think, because we know we don't belong, so we want to fit.
Gosh darn it. One of these podcasts I'm not going to cry for, I promise. Not today. That really touches me. And I know people that are listening can relate so deeply to that feeling. And it seems to me, I'm sure you feel this way as well, that's really exhausting because it's not truly being who we are.
Right.
And in what spaces can we really show up and be 100% who we are when we aren't even sure?
Yeah.
It's very complicated.
We have no pre-trauma personality to know who we really, really are. And you're right. That's the best way to put it, Heidi, is, you just get tired, but you don't even think about it. You don't think about the work because that's your life. Mm-hmm. But you just get tired after a while.
Well, and I don't know if this also resonates with you. Sometimes I feel, and I've heard other adopted people say the same thing, that even when you're surrounded by people that you love and that love you, there's this innate loneliness that is carried, where something's just not quite right. And it's that we have to ride between these 2 worlds that we're not 100% a part of on either side. And I think what we're seeking to do so deeply with the podcast is to help people feel free to share the ache of this pain and to find ways to be able to manage it. And I can't say that I figured it all out, but how have you managed this? Like, what have you leaned into to be able to tolerate so many big, big issues coming and imploding in your life? That's a lot.
It is. And for me, having such identity issues, and just trying to figure out who I am, and what's been great for me and been so anchoring for me is that my relationship with Christ, being a Christ follower, and seeing that as my primary identity, as being in Christ, which I became a Christian in my mid-20s when I was still deeply into the fog. But now that I'm out, boy, it's been helping me in so many different ways, because like I said, it's been about a year and a half. And, and I don't know what it is, before those few years before that you're asking about, that was kind of just investigation and finding and learning what it means to be Black, but learning what it means, for all these things. But then I saw a documentary on adoption and then heard a podcast, and that changed everything. All of a sudden I started coming out of the fog, and just my own narratives, changed on adoption, and seeing what it really is. at first you don't want to accept that trauma, but then it's, it's not fun. But then you realize, that's what it was. That's what it was. And it starts to answer so many questions of why you thought this way back then or did this back then. And to the point where, I'll be joking with my wife, just about it because I'm adopted. But there are so many, there's so many things that I see that I do now and have done throughout my life that I thought was just me or the way I was wired. But I really think it was the adoption piece in my life that directed that.
And it's so helpful to know that, because like you, I thought I was a one-off as well. I didn't really know any other adopted people. And it just seemed that this was the way it is. And to find that we have a community out there that we can connect with, that we can walk with, that we can heal with, that we can share with, it's really revolutionary. And to think, that's some epic denial to think that we're the only ones and that no one else.
Exactly.
What is that, Dirk? I don't even know.
I don't know. I'm just glad I found this, my people.
I know, me too, Dirk. Well, one thing I noted our last conversation, you and I are both alike in this way. We're both obsessed with adoption right now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It's the only thing I talk about. In fact, I was talking to my son up at our pool today, and he goes, "Mom, I'm going to change the subject on you." And it was that moment of reality. But I almost feel that we need that full immersion time to really just not drown in it, but just to sink in it. What do you think about that?
No, I agree 100%. I mean, I think I'm going to be this way from here on out. And I was just thinking the other night too, I was reading something obviously on adoption and just thinking, this has consumed my life, but I want to be here. I want to be in this space. And it's, kind of asking permission with those around you. And then luckily I've just had a lot of really good support, because it's really easy to say, well, he's talking about adoption again, or he's listening to another podcast, so having the support, the family support has been really good. It's just that healing, it's having these conversations like this with you and other adoptees and other forums that just brings so much healing that I can't talk to other people about and make any headway because there's just no way for them to understand. And so I just love the adoption community. It's been super important.
Couldn't agree more. I feel the same way. And I think once you know the truth, there's really no turning back. Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. It's coming out of the fog. It's painful, but it's healing. It's it's kind of a no pain, no gain kind of a thing. You have to go through it. I think we all do. And because you don't want to be in the fog your whole life about this stuff. And I know other adoptees that are, and it saddens me. And I want not only them, but everyone to wake up to what adoption really is. This story, this narrative that's always been out there about adoption. And I'm not an angry adoptee, but there's a lot of things that people, I think, would benefit from learning about.
It's so true. I don't know about you, Dirk, but when I am speaking to someone who doesn't know anything about adoption, and I watch that moment on their face where they begin to understand what you're saying. Yeah. It is such a moment of validation. Because who really asked us what it was like? What was it like for you? Who really asked that question? And we need to ask each other that question so that we can make that headway. Speaking of that, Dirk, I think you have a very powerful perspective as a man, as an adopted man, as a transracially adopted man, to speak to well-meaning parents who may be raising transracially adopted children and they're in denial they're trying to acclimate their child and not acknowledge the differences. What would you want to say to them that could help their child manage this situation? What would have been more helpful? I know you love your parents and they did the best that they could at that point, but what needs to change, and what would you give? Because we do have people listening that are in these situations.
Yeah, it's something that's just so important. I know one thing that would have helped me a lot. You know, like I said, I had adoptees in my family, but we didn't talk about it, and there was no, none of the adults were saying, "Hey, kids, maybe you should discuss these things." I would have benefited so much if I would have known any other adoptee, a friend, been in some kind of a group or something like that, where I could talk to them. And so I knew, that I wasn't alone at 7 rather than, in my late 50s. And because there's just so much pain that happens, and kids aren't going to tell their parents, when they go to school and somebody says, "Oh, they're not your real parents." 9 times out of 10, that the kid's not going to come home and tell his parents that. The kid's going to live with it because he wants to protect his parents. Like I said, racial mirrors is huge. Teach your kids about who they are. Let them know who they are so that they have a lot of have pride in who they are. I've got all these years of shame, not even knowing who I was, and nobody was there to tell me who I was. There are just so many things. I mean, I was loved so much by my parents. My family had good friends, but it's just, that's not enough. It's love isn't the issue at all. It's not about love. It's an identity issue. I didn't know who I was, and that's why so many adoptees grow up with anxiety, and they don't know where that's coming from. When you can't put your finger on something like that, it's maddening. And all my life, was like that. I thought, well, why should I be, anxious about something? Things are going great, and you can't put your finger on it. And that's it. And I mean, think back, in the 60s and 70s with my hair. My parents had no idea what to do with it. And there was a lot of shame there. A lot of shame. And it's I can joke about it now and stuff, but it was rough. I just, when you don't look like anybody, so the parents have to really try to get their kids around people that they look like, and that they can learn how to be who they're, who they want to be, instead of, being a certain, one skin color and trying to be another and thinking that's better, because it's not.
No.
So I've been on a couple of panels with adults, and that's always, what I want to let them know is that what you're doing is going to be really difficult. And yes, love them to pieces, but you've got to really be thinking throughout the process, and you need to be prepared. It's got to be all about that child.
Yeah. So well said, Dirk, because if not, here we are 50s and 60s trying to sort that out. And if that help and support comes earlier, then the issues of identity can start to be worked on a lot earlier.
Exactly.
And I think that's a huge point. And what would you say to other adopted people, Dirk, that are out there that are feeling that steady anxiety? We all know what that is, and it is just torturing, to say the least. What would you tell them if they're trying to seek, they're maybe opening that email that has their DNA results? Like, what can those of us that have walked before, even if it's just a few steps before, it's like, brothers and sisters, hold the phone, do this before you take that step.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely no expert there, but I would say move slow. With all the DNA stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of new relationships that are popping up, and lives are getting definitely adjusted, and it's crazy. And as adoptees, we want answers, and we want them now. And if we get them, I think we just really need to sit on them for a while. That would be my advice, because my instinct was, boom, just go out there and make that phone call. I would slow it down and really be thoughtful, find other adoptees that have gone through it. To me, that's what I've learned so much in the last year and a half, is just getting involved in different adoptee groups. Because I think during COVID is when we both kind of jumped into this realm, and there's so many great groups to join where the people get it, the other adoptees get it, and the younger folks can help out us older adoptees, and I think we can help the younger adoptees. That's what I really want to see. My goal is to get that narrative out there. Let's get the narrative of what adoption really is, and then just start working on that and helping the kids now so that they can grow up much more whole. The community's got just so much to give, and it has to come from us.
It definitely does, because there's nothing like living the experience and sharing the experience. So Dirk, as you form this identity, you answer the question, who am I? What are some things that are exciting or surprising to you? And I'll just give you an example.
Okay.
So when I learned a little bit more about my identity, and even though I'm a white domestic adoptee, there was still a cultural shift because I was raised in Tucson and my ancestors are Pennsylvania Dutch. And I remember, for me, getting to eat the food that all the recipes that have been passed on through my family, those were such treasures. And I would make one of the recipes and eat it. And as silly as that sounds, there was something about that made me feel so connected. Just that small, that I had never had this before, but this was part of my family of origin. And man, did it taste good. So I just wonder, what are some of those delicious little pieces that you're filling in for yourself?
Yeah, speaking of food, I think it was about 3 years ago, when me and my new brother, that's why I call him my new brother, my new sisters, him and I went to New York together, and I'd never been, and we had a cousin there that we met up with, and because I'd spent that whole year, just watching documentary after documentary on Black history, and just trying to envelop myself in what my ancestors went through. And so we went to Harlem together and had a meal. I think it was the Red Rooster. It was just the most fantastic thing. I was like, where has this food been all my life? It was just, it was great. Then we went to the Apollo and yeah, we just had a blast, and being with him, just me and my brother that I had just met, and we just connected so immediately, and just when those connections are great with new family members you meet, and just looking like somebody, that's just been the most amazing thing for me. I had nobody close that I looked like, until I had kids, but that's not the same. And when I saw that I looked so much like my birth dad, so much so that all my other siblings now call me Junior. Because I look like him more than all of them. So that part's just really been a blast. That's been fun. But just learning, and that's just kind of how I'm wired too, is I just want to know everything yesterday. So that part's just really been fun.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dirk. I can see you there, the Red Rooster. Oh my gosh,
Oh
I won't
man,
even go
that
down
was
that
fun.
tangent. I want to go there so badly.
It was
Well,
great.
Dirk, as we begin to flesh out the rest of your interview, what else is on your heart and in your mind that you would like to say? I want to make sure that you're able to end the interview the way that you want to.
Yeah, I guess things I've sort of already mentioned. I just really want people to learn what adoption is like. I mean, it's such a business out there with kids that it costs $40,000. I just don't understand. I don't understand that. It just is so beyond me. And every adoptee should have a right to his own life story. I finally got my OBC because I was born in Illinois. I got mine in maybe 2011 or 2012. But, I was already, over 50 when I got that. So it's just not right. So I just really hope our community just keeps growing and growing, that we can get our stories out and that we can see a lot of these state laws change so that, we can find out who we are. Because it sounds crazy, that we don't have a right, that legally we don't have a right to know who we are. I had another name before Dirk, and I don't even know who named me. I don't know if it was my birth mom or not, but it's just crazy to me now that I look at these things. So many whys, why not? What's it going to hurt to tell somebody who they are? Everybody else has that right. I guess I'm getting more kind of in that what it's just going to help more people, and not just adoptees. It's going to help others as well. Healing goes out, like when you throw a pebble in the lake, it's good for all. We got to get the healing going and get this narrative out there, the correct one.
I couldn't agree more, Dirk. And I know your story is going to add a lot of volume. And I so appreciate you taking the time to reach out and spending time with me today, sharing very personal things. I know it will help a lot of people. From my heart to yours, thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate it, Heidi. And I love your podcast and you're so good at it, at making it very comfortable to do, and the stories that I've heard on your podcast have been great, and it just we just got to keep going at it, right?
Yeah, we do, Dirk. Yeah, we do. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Heidi.